Washington's making a big-time push for UCLA's top commit.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well. So you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a fun, jam-packed recruiting episode for all the everydayers out there. We're going to try to make some sense at wide receiver and running back in the 27 class because there are some really interesting names that Washington's in on at those positions. And we just got to figure it out because those are positions Washington has done really well at, but we want to see what it's going to look like in the future. We're going to talk about this 26 class and how many bodies UW might take before early signing day, which is on December 3rd. But the big news is just about an hour after we record last night, a guy who we threw out on yesterday's show, as the everydayers know, 4-star defensive lineman Carter Gooden from Massachusetts gets a UW offer, and it seems like the Huskies are going to push really hard to get him up here on an official visit, and I absolutely love this for UW, but it's not going to be easy.
Exactly. And that's kind of when we talked about it on the show. How do you wiggle your way in there? Because absolutely at 6-2, Washington has the resume, interest, all those types of things to warrant that interest from, a guy like Carter Gooden. So you look at it and think, how do you bridge the gap, like I was saying, with the relationship angle? And I know there's, a couple of different ways you can go about it, but I think just the more you kind of win out, the more you start to hone in on, hey, we're losing 11 guys over the next year and a half. We need the bodies. And by the way, even if we're losing 3 or 4 bodies, you still take him. You find a way to make that number work, because when you look at the defensive linemen that Washington missed on this year, you kind of mask things a little bit with T.I. Makais, but this would be a significant pairing along with the rest of the class you already have.
So I agree with you where I went back and watched the film, and I love this kid. I think he's really, really talented. It was a nice get by UCLA. And we'll talk about why in a minute, because I look at just where the interest is coming from right now. It seems like Tennessee and Miami are both making big pushes. And I look at the kid where he's from Canada originally and played hockey, lacrosse, and basketball growing up. What a very interesting trio of other sports, which is, it is very cool. And I think the hockey stuff really shines through when you watch this kid, where he's listed at 6'5" and 255 pounds right now. And I can see him staying on the edge, but he also has the frame, a lot like Derek Coleman-Brusa, to continue adding weight and eventually shift inside. And it's really interesting because he's still very new to the game of football. And it's clear where the hand usage and a couple other things in terms of just like more advanced pass rush moves are not there yet. And that's okay with a player like this, because that's not what you're looking at. You're looking at the things that really shine through, which is the power. He's got really nice balance and coordination for his size, which is where the hockey stuff really comes into play. And I think that's, like I said, really, really cool. He's got a great motor. And one thing that you can certainly teach to an extent, but at this young of an age, is something that is just a nice trait to have, which is why he's rated in the top 100 overall by 247 Sports, is he's got really great eyes. And I think that's something that's really important when talking about a player of this caliber, because when you are bringing a kid in, especially with just a program like Washington and where you're at along the defensive line right now, you want these kids, even if they are a little bit more raw, to be able to contribute really early on in their careers, where like we've seen Devin Hyde do this year, where when we spoke to him right after he committed last year, one of the things he said was, I certainly want to be able to play right away, and I feel like this is where I might be used, but I want to work on, myself as a pass rusher in this capacity or in that capacity. And I feel very similarly with where Carter Gooden is right now. I think he's a little bit, more advanced in terms of like he's 6'5", 255. Like I said, like he's got a truly elite frame to play, whether it be on the edge or on the interior moving forward. And I'm really excited about what that could look like with Washington. But like I said, Tennessee got in the mix a little bit earlier. Miami was in the mix a little bit earlier. And I'm just curious to see how things shape up, because I do believe that Washington is going to make a very significant push here. But again, it's going to be really tough with some of these other schools in the mix that, like you said, offered a little bit sooner and also have the edge in terms of they were able to schedule an official visit earlier because a report came out from 247 Sports saying that he wants to be able to find a way to work an official visit to UW into the mix. But UW's final 2 home games are against Purdue, but it seems like he's got a game that night. So there's some kind of scheduling conflict involved there. And then he's also got an official visit set up for Washington's final home game of the year when they take on Oregon to end the regular season. So I feel like this coaching staff is with a player of this caliber is going to find a way to work something out. But again, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah, this is going to be a Tuesday, Wednesday, potential Thursday visit. Yeah, just some point before signing day. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes to fruition. The one thing that you said that really stuck to me, and I can kind of speak on it a little bit, is the lacrosse angle. When you talk about his eyes, depending on what position, because I was kind of trying to do some quick research here, I still haven't found it. I'd be curious, did he play defense or midfield for lacrosse? Because when you talk about a quick twitch, a quick motor, and those types of things, you have to have that when you're playing lacrosse. And if you're talking about a long stick for defender in lacrosse, you're still talking about a guy that has to still be agile and things like that. So I can absolutely see the explosiveness come to fruition there over a couple of years as he starts to get more acquainted with the game and things like that. And when you're talking about adding one more guy along the defensive line, you're willing to take that risk on a guy who, as you mentioned, hasn't played football really that long, coming from Canada and things like that, I think it was Ontario, Canada. So you look at it and say, whether he ends up being inside or outside, the projectability is there, and you need the bodies enough to make that work. And I think they're going to find a way, absolutely, to get him on campus. We know Jedd at this point, and you go down the list of the staff that we know as well. There's no way they don't get him on campus. It's just going to be how close is it between when he comes on campus and signing day, because that could work in your favor. Sure. And that could also work against you, where sometimes we hear those visits, let's say it's scheduled for December 1st or December 2nd. Okay, now you're talking about a prayer there.
So I agree with you, but this is the other thing that was really interesting from this 247 report is that he was also really interested in Penn State before James Franklin got fired and seemed to really like Franklin as a coach. So one thing you can't rule out here is he waits to see where Franklin goes and then maybe takes an official visit to that new school. And so maybe he doesn't sign until February. Like it's something else to consider as we move on here. But the last thing that is really important in this, and it's nice that there was a report done by Brian Doan over at CBS who talked about the fact that in terms of this new revenue share era, like the UCLA allotment for him, which is not the biggest reason he committed to UCLA, as was stated in this article, is that there was just a payment structure outlined to get him over $1 million a year. And I'll link the article down in the description below because it's very important that if you want to go check this out, like that's just kind of what defensive line recruiting has been for a while now. And this is what we've talked about a lot on the show, that in order to get some of these top prospects, you need to be willing to pony up a little bit. And I'm really curious to see where Washington is going to fall on that, because I think that UW absolutely, as we've talked about before, has the resources to make significant offers to some of these big-time defensive linemen. You aren't getting a player like T.I. Mukais and how that recruitment went down if you aren't able to shell out a little bit for players that you feel fit your evaluation. And I feel like Carter Gooden is going to fit this evaluation that this coaching staff is looking for very, very well. So over these next couple of weeks, maybe months, again, depending on if he does choose to sign in December or not, I think that there's a long way just to go in this recruitment. And I think that with Washington's need at the position, they're going to be right in the middle of it.
I don't disagree with anything you said, but let's say he does wait until February, then you got to deal with the portal. And are you willing to allocate those resources for a four-year high school? I agree. The reason why I bring it up is just to say, like, we mentioned, the Derek Harmon thing, or, other guys where would you rather go for a 1 year like that and go all in on those resources? Or do you kind of hope that you get the the return on investment over a 3 or 4 year span, which I think is the right play. And as Jedd has shown, like, that's the move you want to make, especially for sustainability and long-term success in the Big Ten. But you can see the handleization kind of going both ways.
I agree with you. I think there are going to be separate allocations here for high school versus the portal. But I also believe that this is one of those recruitments where you find a way. It doesn't matter. You find a way to make this one work. And Lars, speaking of finding a way, Washington is going to find a way to add a couple more players to this 26th class outside of Carter Gooden. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings the same attention to how we craft every model. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. So I'm really curious to see what this 2026 class is going to look like, where there was a statement made by four-star offensive tackle Marlen Bright's dad on Twitter that he's going to be on campus for the Purdue game in a couple of weeks for his official visit. Very curious to see if four-star quarterback commit Derek Zammit, also from DePaul Catholic High School in New Jersey, decides to come with him, because this is something that you and I have talked about for a while, is we think that there's going to be one more offensive lineman in this class. Curious to see where it might come from, but this would be a really nice win. Just a true tackle frame, really projectable. Definitely going to take him a year or two to get on the field, where he's listed at 6'6", 260 pounds right now. But when you just think raw numbers of this class right now, how many more guys do you think that this class can realistically hold?
3. I mean,
Okay.
I think, going beyond that is really kind of stretching it. I think the only way you go beyond that is if it is a quintessential 5-star, or, just kind of the out of the blue guy that, pops up or is a flip, like those types of guys. Yeah, you will always take them. But aside from that, this class doesn't scream, hey, we're going to press for this position or that position. And also, you're not in the position where you're going to lose anybody from the class where you need to then kind of hit the panic mode and then go a 2-for-1 option where, let's say you lose I can't even think of the name right now, but you just lose somebody from the class that's currently committed, and then maybe you decide to supplement with a, high-end guy and a low-end guy to kind of offset the where you see the numbers projecting out. So for me, I would just say 3.
So let me ask you this then. Can you break that down by position?
See, that's the thing, is like, you're definitely taking one more offensive lineman. You're definitely taking one more guy in the front 7. I'm going to say front 7. And I think that number might be 2. And then I wonder, is there if you set the over under at 2.5 or 3.5, because you lose CJ Lavin
guys outside of that?
Exactly. Well, just in general, because the loss of CJ Lavender, you don't really feel as much because you have so many defensive backs already committed. Sure. I don't look at the specialists, CJ Wallace is a guy where that's not going to change. So I don't see that number changing. Everything else seems to be set. Like, I don't necessarily see an area where you would go push for another high school guy. I think if anything, you might allocate that position to the portal, but not necessarily to the high school rank.
So that's where I disagree, because I do agree that with the 3 numbers that you throw out there of one offensive lineman, potentially 2 in the front 7, where I think Ramzak Fruean is one of those guys you take no matter what. But then another guy who's more of a true defensive lineman, where Ramzak can certainly play outside linebacker, but they definitely, especially when you watch the film, want him in more of a just versatile inside-outside role, a lot like Zadrius Randy-Saleh projects out in the future. I think that if you set that number at 3.5, I'd take the under, but we've already seen that this coaching staff wants to push for more guys. And it's just, hey, if you can add more talent to this class and you have an opportunity to do so, you're going to go out and do it. Like, I think of Jaden Pettit from Florida, the 4-star wide receiver who's committed to Wisconsin, who took an unofficial visit to Oklahoma this past weekend. I think of 3-star Torrey Davis, who was up on an official visit this past weekend. Kekua Aumua, the 3-star tight end who's a Florida commit, that was here on an official visit this past weekend. I think that I might still take the under on that number, but if I were to put a number on it right now, I would say 5, because it's just something where I go back to something we talk about a lot on the show, Jedd Fisch's original point of we're never going to be in a position to turn down talent. And wherever that might come from, I certainly agree with that. And I look at Torrey Davis as a guy who can play some free safety, can play a little bit of nickel for you, and has a really nice high ceiling. And he's visiting Texas this upcoming weekend, probably going to wind up making a decision not too long after that. That's one of those dudes where if you're in a position to take him, especially after CJ Lavender decides to go to UCLA, you say yes 10 times out of 10. Kekua Aumua, adding more depth at tight end, and he's got the size and versatility and just overall athleticism where if you come in and, it's, hey, we like the way you're moving, let's try that out at edge rusher. I don't think that that's necessarily the worst idea in the world. I know that's something our buddy Scott Eklund was talking about over on dogman.com as well. And then somebody like Jaden Pettit on top of that, where I know this is something that you and I have both talked about over on Huskies Wire as well, is assuming Denzel Boston leaves the NFL draft after this year, which feels very likely, including Blaise LaVista. You have 3 wide receivers on this roster that are 6'2" or taller. Why not go grab another one, especially a high-end guy who right now is committed to an offense that, let's just say, doesn't like to throw the ball and isn't very good at it. So if you're able to go sell a kid like that on flipping, it's not necessarily like, oh, do you think you're losing a guy here or there or whatever? It's no, if you can add another talented guy to this class, you go do that in any way, shape, or form. And that's what this most recent round of offers felt like to the Michigan State commit as well, wide receiver. Where all 3 of those guys, it's no, we think those guys are really good. If we can take those guys, we're going to take them.
So I agree with that in the sense of that the talent that the recent recruits have is worthy of being, a take. But also, as you were saying all that, it made me think maybe it's not a numbers in the 26 class. It's what's the attrition looking like on the roster, where Jedd Fisch said, like, for example, Charlie Kroll picked up another injury and things like that. So maybe you look at the tight end depth. These are other things that we're not necessarily thinking of in the front of our mind. And, kind of that's why I'm bringing it up, because what's to say, some guys don't transfer out and then you have more numbers to allocate back into the high school ranks, which I think is where you should invest those numbers.
So I agree with you when you talk about tight end. I think that the more likely option though than Charlie Kroll right now, who they just love as a blocking tight end, how he projects out there, is Ryan Otten. And the fact that Ryan Otten unfortunately had to medically retire, maybe that was something they weren't necessarily considering in, late July, early August, when you also had like Kai Wesley come on campus for an official visit. And now you're looking at it and saying, oh yeah, okay, we do have an extra spot available at that position. And with the willingness to go a little bit over the 85-man scholarship limit, which is something else that we've seen, just since the last time Jedd spoke about it, when he said, oh, I think that's going to be pretty hard set. And then they're like, 86, 87 right now, I think, if you really dive into it. I think those are all things to consider in this as well, where again, it all comes back down to the conversation at the end of the day of just getting more talent in the room, however you can come by it. And Torrey Davis is a guy who's a borderline 4-star on 247. Jaden Pettit, again, is a 4-star guy. And I just think of guys like that, where if you're in a position to even where they are interested in you and taking an official visit and doing all those things, you entertain it and you just see where it might go. And I think that we're going to see that on the defensive line as well, where it's going to be a little bit harder, but this is why we wanted to open the conversation with Carter Gooden as well, because that's one of those guys where if he's interested, yeah, you take him.
And that's the thing, is if you keep winning, those recruits are going to keep watching you more and more
Absolutely.
and more. And I think, and it's a very realistic possibility that UW goes into the season finale against Oregon with still 2 losses. And then you're talking about, if UW makes the playoffs, that perception of UW of, okay, Jedd in year 2, all right, yeah, we're considering him, he's not really, and now all of a sudden UW's 10-2. This is a massively different conversation. And now you are in on some recruits that necessarily you weren't either in on or that didn't view you in the same light. And we look at the production that the offense has had this season, Jedd and Damani, Jonah laying the foundation for running backs and all those types of things. Denzel laying the foundation for receiver, and Desmond showing that anybody at any size can make an impact. And so I agree with you in terms of you don't have a lot of tall bodies at receiver moving forward. Yeah, Justice Williams is still there, and you have a number of bodies that you can make it work. But yeah, the more you're able to win and stack wins, you're stacking bodies and stacking talent. Yeah, you're going to be in a lot more conversations than people realize.
But that's more so the point, right? It's not just like, oh, we need another tall guy in the room, and if we can get Jaden Pettit, let's go get him. No, it's more so this is what all the top programs around the country are doing. It's this good player is interested and wants to come to our school, we take him and we figure it out later. And I like that this is the mentality. It's still like a very difficult discussion to have for Jedd, I think, as a coach where the career record is like hovering around 500, and he is doing everything in his power to improve that. And we've been very impressed with what he's been able to do so far this season. And I think that's part of it. And recruits are certainly starting to take notice of that. But there's a lot more than just that goes into building a program. And it's why one of the things that you and I have talked about a lot when it comes to the recruiting trail is Jedd and this staff are perfect for what UW is doing right now in this transition to the Big Ten. And as you continue to try to establish yourself as one of the top teams in this conference and continue to move forward, is we are able to sell this program at a really high level and getting all this interest from all over the country. And as you said, if you're able to continue winning, I think that's all going to work out. And let's turn our attention to 2027 because there are some really high-end bodies, especially at wide receiver and running back, that are interested in UW. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. I love how the Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It actually tracks your reps, suggests the right weights, and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter. And the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. Lars, let's start at running back because Washington has done a tremendous job recruiting running backs in the 25 and 26 classes. You've obviously got, I'm going to say 2.5 bodies committed at running back right now because 4-star Dre Pollard could play running back, could play wide receiver. We'll see. That's probably not a decision that's going to be made until he gets on campus. But I look at running back in 2024 through 2026, and Scotty Graham has done a really nice job of going after two particular types of running backs. He wants a big, physical, run between the tackles kind of guy. In 2026, you've got Ansu Sanoe, and you want a speed guy who can certainly run between the tackles, but is going to thrive outside and just, outside zones, different things like that. A lot like Brian Bonner. I think that Brian Bonner is certainly a unique case where I know this coaching staff wants him to wind up at somewhere between 210, 220 pounds by the time his high school or his college career is over. And he certainly, if he can retain the 10-4 speed that he showed as a sophomore, is probably going to be one of the better running backs in this conference when you just go watch his film and everything. But I look at 2027 and I see a very, very different approach, which I'm very interested in. And I love it. It's the home run. We want a big time guy. And the conversation has to start with Noah Roberts.
It does. And ironically enough, it's from the state of Arizona, where Jedd and Scotty Graham both made their bread and butter. But also with Bashaw High School, the connection you have with DeMond and things we've talked about recently, I put him at the top of the list, but you go through.
Absolutely.
You have 9 different states, from New York to Arizona, Florida to California. You got Texas, Nevada, a number of different states sprinkled in here. Scotty is spanning the country. I think even DC, there's a prospect from DC that's got an offer.
I'm going to talk about him.
Exactly. That's why I was teased just by the location, because that's what I love about actually this approach is when you look at how this room should project out. I think Adam Muhammad would be a junior at that point in time, senior maybe. I again, correct me if I'm wrong.
He'd be a senior.
And so again, you're talking about him, Jordan Washington, plus one of Julian McMahon. You sprinkle in however those guys end up developing into Sanoe. There's enough roster on the roster at that point in time to where you only really need one. And I think at that point, you can go a number of different ways. And Noah Roberts to me, I don't want to say there's not a can't miss guy, but he's almost as can't miss as you can get, given how early they got in on him and the ties that you have with Basha and the state of Arizona. So if you don't end up getting him, I'm really intrigued as to see who UW would get. But again, for me right now, Noah Roberts at the top of the list.
So I agree with you that Noah Roberts is the number one target. I think that there is a clear top 3 or 4 or so in this class, and then it's just kind of everyone else, because I look at it more so in just the way guys have been interacting with UW on Twitter, and also Scotty Graham's most recent, just stretch of in-home and in-school visits, where he made no secret of going out to the East Coast and going after Elijah Kimball in New York and DeJohn Talley Rhodes down in DC, where I would say that right now is just where UW's focus should be at running back, where it does seem like there's some interest. And as you continue to, grow your footprint in the Big Ten. Why not take a big time swing on those big time players? Because I look at this class and it's, as you said, if you're taking one high end guy, that's fine. And, maybe if you need to supplement because somebody does transfer or somebody leaves the draft, whatever it might be, like, you can do that and still afford to have one big name guy moving forward, because we've seen what it looks like. They're not afraid to give Adam Muhammad touches as a true freshman. It doesn't seem like they're going to be afraid to give Brian Bonner touches next year. So if things work out and it's, hey, this freshman running back is really, really good, the truly elite programs, they don't care about that. They don't care about where it comes from. I was watching the Ohio State game a few weeks ago, and it's, hey, who has the most rushing yards as a true freshman in Ohio State history? It's like, oh, there's Travion Henderson, J.K. Dobbins, all these like really big time names. They get them involved early. And Washington, I love that they're not afraid to do that. And I think that that's something that they're selling to these big time running backs. And they're going to go where they're going to play. And if that's going to be at UW, I agree that no Roberts is number one. But those are two other names that I wanted to throw out there because I really like, just from what I've seen from their film. But then on top of that, it feels like there is a mutual interest there that this Washington coaching staff should exploit. Because if you can go get some of these big time guys off the East Coast, like you just did with Derek Zammit, like you're trying to do with Marlen Bright, that could wind up being a big win for you long term. And I feel the same way at wide receiver. And there's one guy I really want to get to there because I think that he is just so much fun to watch. But there are a lot of names that Washington is in on, from Washington to Florida, like truly spanning the country. And I think they take three. And I mean, even though the room is already just like really chock full of talent, there's a chance I think they take four.
And the one thing that Jedd will always do is take a wide receiver. I know that kind of sounds crazy where why wide receivers? Wouldn't you be a quarterback or an offensive lineman? Tyrone McMillan. Like, there's a name that for whatever reason sticks to me, where I remember Jedd's press conference at Arizona in 22, I want to say, where he's like, look, you're always going to be on the eye. You're keeping your eyes open for great wide receivers. And you look at this class, they're at what, 30, like 29, 30 offers to wide receivers. Now, worth, just kind of caveating that by saying not all of them are in the same realm in terms of where you view them, but still considering them and still willing to throw them an offer and things like that, this is no longer the Chris Peterson era. So, shout out Jedd for that. But with that being said, you look at it, like for me, a guy like Julian Cromartie, where 6'2", 6'3", from Texas, has the production. Kevin Cummings can do a lot with that talent. I'm not just saying it as a former NFL name, but, again, the dad.
No, that certainly plays into this. Yeah.
Like, you see the bloodline there. Now, that doesn't always equate to, hey, my dad played in the NFL, so I'm going to be really good. I'm not saying that pro or against, but I'm just saying, when you look at him on tape, you can see, like, in 18, 24 months, when he's in college and gets up gains a little more weight, gets fully into his frame, almost like a Justice Williams, then you can start to see him have an impact. So if you're able to sprinkle in one or two of those guys, and then you go get a truly high-end, 4-star top 100 type of player, yeah, that's where that number gets to 3 or 4.
So let's talk about one of those top 100 kind of players, because I think that Washington is absolutely enamored with him because he fits into the system really, really well. And that's IMG. He's originally from California, receiver Osani Gayles, who again placed UW in his top 10 on like Thursday or Friday of last week, I want to say it was. And this is one of those dudes who, when I watch his film, he reminds me a lot of Mason James, because he's in that same range of 5'11", 6 foot, and plays inside and outside, just can get down the field really, really well, but is one of those guys who you can place inside or outside, and he's going to find a way to win. But the one guy who I really want to talk about, because that's a name who, like, top 100 overall player, like, really talented kid, but it's going to be a real fight for him. Another guy in that same mold, but I think is just kind of one guy that UW really needs to zero in on during this just 27 classes. There are so many names that I really like, but it's Tre Moore, the 4-star wide receiver from Texas, who was on campus over the weekend for an unofficial visit. That's one guy who, like, at 6'3", I think 170, 180, somewhere in that ballpark right now, just fits the Denzel Boston role so well. He's a really nice athlete. I was watching his film over the weekend when I heard he was going to be coming up on a visit. And he's one of those kids where you see the way he releases off the line, and no matter if it's press, if somebody's giving him a cushion, he finds a way to just do it untouched, which is a lot of fun to see at that size. And a kid who can stretch the field like that, like Roma Dunze did, like Denzel Boston is doing, like we think Justice Williams can do next season. This is one of those guys who I think needs to be one of the top priorities for this coaching staff moving forward.
Like Jalen Polk. In a way, we just got the stretches the field can take a deep shot.
But much bigger is more so, yeah.
Absolutely, with that being, but I was waiting for the Texas name to come out there because in previous years you didn't have that big guy from Texas, but you had some semblance of Texas. And in the representation that Jedd has been for Washington, you are getting bigger and better, and you are leveling up. And that's no slight to the other guys that you've gotten from the state of Texas. Shout out Aaron Fuller, love the guy. But when you look at what he brings, and a name that came around as you were saying, Tre Moore, was Joshua Moore way back in the day, a guy that ended up, I think, at Texas somewhere in that realm. But again, bigger. And I think that to me is when you talk about being physical in the Big Ten and having that strong run game and being able to run block just as well, that's why you're going for that size. You're not just doing it to say, we want bigger, faster, stronger. I wonder which coach said that a couple of years ago. But with that being said, it's true. You want to have that guy that is already coming into your program at a higher caliber than, years past. And that's just kind of what the evolution of the program should be.
Absolutely. So there are two more things I want to dive into before we get out of here. I'm going to talk about a couple out-of-state guys that I'm really interested in and a couple in-state guys. Let's start with the in-state guys because I feel like Washington should have room for both, but I feel like there might end up being a race for one of these spots in Braylon Pope and Josiah Mitchell. I like these guys both project out really, really well into that outside role. They're listed at 6'4" and 6'5". Like these are big dudes. And I'm interested to see what ends up happening with both of them because I look at a guy like Braylon Pope and I think he's someone that if you're able to take him, you go out and you get him ASAP because not only, just the in-state thing, because that applies to both of them, but just someone who also fits the system really well. And I think is a little bit more physically ready to play. Mitchell is a little bit taller at 6'5", and I just think his frame is a little bit further away from being college ready. So I'm curious to see what this coaching staff wants to do with those guys.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I don't really have another one to compare Pope. I guess aside from the obvious Denzel Boston one.
That's the one.
I was, but because what I was thinking in my head was it's Denzel Boston, Ty Jones. If you think about it, like how Ty had the impact, had the size, but didn't necessarily have the impact, where Denzel has the impact, but wasn't that 6'5". There was another big, tall 6'5" guy that was back on the team years ago that I wanted to throw out there. But if I'm choosing right now, you can only have one, it's Braylon Pope. And for me, it's just you're seeing that high-end production in the ready-to-play presence now. That plays more for me in Jedd's offense than Mitchell. And that's not to say Mitchell doesn't play in the offense. I'm not saying
he does. He absolutely does.
Exactly. I'm just saying right away, quick impact. Like we see the freshman get on the field. That to me is where I'm coming from.
So I think that one thing that if Washington does want to take both of them, I feel like Mitchell has the body to wind up a tight end. Just at that size and just with his frame, he absolutely has just the room to add weight and play tight end. And if I think that's a very realistic possibility as well. So just something to consider there. A couple of out-of-state names that I want to throw out there before we get out of here. I think that Zerek Sidney is somebody who we've talked about on the show a lot, is someone that Washington is really, really high on. Damani Warren is another name from Nevada that I would certainly keep an eye on, where there are a lot of guys that, as you said, 29, 30 offers have gone out. I think that's one of those dudes where as you continue to try to just really establish yourself on the West Coast, UW has thrived in Nevada, especially in this 26 class. Gavin Day, Dre Pollard, Dominic Harris. They've done really, really good, just a really good job of getting some of the top prospects in Nevada to stay close to home. Troy Fautanu, obviously a few years ago under Chris Peterson. This is one of those guys where just a really big, fun athlete that I would love to see in this Jedd Fisch system. But Lars, that's all we got for today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank to all of you everydayers out there for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you know when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.